guys, it is Chef Andrea with A Chef's Cooking Studio here to answer some questions for you guys. It's Q&A with Chef A, and today we're talking about one of my absolute favorite ingredients, butter. So I get a few questions about butter consistently, again and again. We're going to tackle a few of them through this podcast pod. The first thing that I want to talk about today with butter is the question I get the most about butter, which is salted versus unsalted. So salted versus unsalted butter, which should I use? Does it matter? I'm going to give you a very short answer, and then as usual, I'll give you a little bit longer one. Okay, here's my short answer. Are you ready? Salted. That's it. That's a wrap. Are we good? Can we call it a day? Ready to get out of here? I'm just kidding. First of all, there's nobody here but me. Salted. That's my shortest, easiest answer. Let's talk a little bit about why that is, though. Within talking about why it is that I like salted versus unsalted, let's talk a little bit about why it is that you might be choosing unsalted versus salted. The answer I get the most when I throw a question back. So people ask me salted or unsalted, and I ask why, which are you using and why? And here's what I hear. I'm using unsalted because I read that professional pastry chefs only use unsalted butter in baking, because if you use salted, you'll throw off the salt balance and you won't get the desired results. Okay, so that's one. We're going to use unsalted butter so that we can control the salt in our final product. That's one answer that I get. Another answer that I get is just health reasons. Unsalted butter is healthier. We have been told to cut back on sodium in our diet, and that seems like a place to do that. So unsalted fat would be healthier fat than salted fat. So let's break those down for a moment. And then we'll get into why I'm such a fan of salted butter. So as far as health purposes, I'm going to tackle that one first. The thing that I share with everybody here about sodium in your diet is that this is a discussion between you and your physician and your family. And if you've never had this discussion with your physician, ever, my guess is you probably don't have a sodium issue. The people that are on low sodium, prescribed low sodium regimens, let me tell you guys, it is no joke. They are probably taking a couple of prescription drugs to support that low sodium regimen, some sort of stabilizer or inhibitor, who knows the jargon there. But it's not an accident. A true low sodium regimen is intense. There is more sodium in a single can of diet soda typically than they can consume, are supposed to consume in a day. It's a big deal, and it takes a lot of focus and a lot of effort. So if you haven't actually had the sodium conversation with your physician, you just heard through the grapevine that in general we eat too much sodium, and so you've decided to cut back on that at home. I will suggest to you that you think a little bit about how your home cooking is going, how it feels to you, how it feels to your family. I know a lot of couples that if they were really pressed, to be honest, about using sodium in their home cooking, one or the other of them is kind of always a little disappointed in how unsalted the food at home is. And if that's going on at your house and you also don't necessarily have a sodium issue, it's a sort of this arbitrary punishment that you've set into your own kitchen, I'm going to offer that you might want to reconsider that. Let's talk a little bit about where unhealthy sodium sneaks into our diets, okay? So guess what? We drink a lot more sodium in this country than many of us realize. Sodium comes in through canned sodas like crazy. And even quote-unquote healthier ones, if you're trying to go with like a diet soda or something like that, those can be really riddled with sodium. So there's one thing that you could get rid of and still salt your food at home. Here's where sodium really creeps in. It shows up in our processed foods, and it shows up in anything that is handed to you through your driver's side window. So if you are a regular fast food eater, I'm going to agree that you are probably getting more sodium in your day than is recommended. If you are a regular processed food eater, so a lot of your diet is heated up in the microwave, or it comes out of the pantry ready to eat. So that's going to be things like chips and stuff like that, ready to eat, right? Boy, there's a lot of sodium in those products. That's not a joke. But if you are the person who is doing, an egg for breakfast, some avocado toast, or some oatmeal for breakfast, and a homemade sandwich for lunch, and then you're just cooking meals in the evenings or on the weekends, and you've been really cutting back on the salt, thinking that that somehow is going to keep you in a healthier place, I don't know that you need that. I really think that those sodium warnings are for those of us who are consuming far too many canned sodas, far too many processed foods, and relying on the drive-through multiple times a week. That's the sodium problem in this country. And if that doesn't sound like you, and also your physician has never bothered to sit you down and say, look, we've got to do something about your sodium intake, then I say take a break. Maybe just for the next 4 weeks, up the salt in your home cooking by just a half a teaspoon per recipe, and just kind of see what happens. Does it wake it up? Does it brighten it up? It probably will. So salt, not in my butter, as a health option, if you're not battling a sodium issue anyway, a real one, a prescribed sodium focus, I don't think there's enough salt in salted butter and the amount of butter that you're going to consume in a week that it would create a sodium issue at home. What salted butter will do is really brighten everything up, right? Salted fat is flavorful fat, and so that one egg that you're scrambling in unsalted butter, try it in salted butter this week and just watch it pop. I mean, it really can make a big difference. So unsalted for health reasons. I hope that's a little explanation there. Let's get into unsalted because we want to be professional pastry chefs and we want to control the salt in our final product. So the thing about that is, again, there's so little salt in salted butter that I've never in my life, in my experience, in my kitchen time, I've never pulled a chocolate chip cookie out of my oven that I said, ew, that's too salty. It's just never been a problem for me. There's so little salt in salted butter, and what I'm always working on here is building layers and layers of flavor. One thing about my cooking is that when I complete a recipe, it's really rare that it needs salt at the end. You know how a lot of recipes will tell you at the end to salt to taste? Mine, I build them up as I go, and I just don't really have a problem with having flavor right at the very end. So if I start my saute, if I start my roux, if I start whatever I'm doing with butter, my scampi with salted butter, I start building that flavor profile right from the very base and work it through the entire dish. Even in baking and pastry, have you ever done a chocolate chip cookie that didn't ask for salt? It surely does. So why would something like a chocolate chip cookie want salt in it? Well, the short story on salt is that salt makes everything taste more like itself until you overdo it, and then everything tastes like salt, right? I mean, you certainly can take that too far. But if you're really just talking about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt in any given dish or batter or cookie dough, what the salt's doing is it's making the butter taste like butter. It's making the chocolate chips taste like chocolate chips, right? If it's in oatmeal cookies, it's making the cinnamon taste like cinnamon. Salt has this way of making the other things in that recipe taste more like themselves. So that's why there's already salt in your chocolate chip cookies, and if there's already salt in my chocolate chip cookies, I'm okay with using salted butter. I suppose if you're concerned about it and your chocolate chip cookie recipe calls for a teaspoon of salt, you could back it off and try it with half a teaspoon and use salted butter next time and just see how that works. I'll be honest with you, I ignore every recipe that says unsalted butter. I ignore that and I just use my salted butter, and I've never had anything come out too salty. And I love using kosher salt and salted butter in my chocolate chip cookies, because then every once in a while you'll get a little nugget of that kosher salt it'll just land right next to a chocolate chip and you'll get that combo. Wow, is that really good? So is this conversation about butter or about salt? Well, I guess it's about both. Salt, it makes everything taste like itself. And butter, butter is one of those ingredients that we do need to be careful how much butter we consume, for sure. It's fat, and but most dishes don't call for a ton of butter, and dishes that do call for a lot. We did a savory babka class last night, and the loaf of bread called for a whole stick of salted butter. But that loaf of bread, I'm really not kidding you guys. I bet it made, I'm going to say 8 to 10 big servings. Big. Like my husband and I we each ate a slice of that babka with a small salad for dinner. I mean, the slice of that was our dinner. It was that filling. So that stick of butter went a long way. And it typically does in recipes. That's really very common. So salted versus unsalted. I have noticed that some European brands that they sell in the United States will mention that they're lightly salted. Keep in mind why we salted butter to begin with. It's a preservative as well, isn't it? So it'll help keep those butters stable for a longer amount of time. So stabilizes your butter, adds some flavor to your butter, adds some flavor to your final dish because of it. I love all of those things. If you do a Google search on salted versus unsalted, I'll tell you this, if you did that Google search 15 years ago, not a lot would pop up. If you do it now, article after article after article, more and more, I've noticed recipe websites, more and more chefs are coming forward and saying, I'm down with salted. I'm liking what's happening there. A friend of mine who actually I met because she was a student here at A Chef's Cooking Studio, and then over time, as all of my students ultimately do, she just became a good friend. Hi, Eileen. Nice to see you. Eileen sent me an article probably, I'm going to say 4 years ago, something like that, and it was talking about the popularity of unsalted butter in the U.S., and specifically post-World War II. That at least in our country, one of the things that happened is that salting butter was expensive, and so during wartime, World War II, unsalted butter is what started to become readily available in stores because it was less expensive, I guess, for the manufacturers to produce it without salt. So post-World War II, they go back to offering salted, but offering salted and salted, but get this, they charge the same price either way. And we were happy to pay just the same for salted versus unsalted. So guess what they said? If you're going to pay more for the one that cost me less to produce, I'm not going to stop producing it. So that's kind of interesting that was one of the big things that created a demand for, well, I guess made that product more common in our home kitchens after World War II. So salted versus unsalted. My short answer, salted every time. My longer answer is think about why you were considering unsalted, or think about why you've only ever used unsalted. What was behind it? And I hope that those thoughts might have answered those questions a little bit, at least giving you an opportunity to go out and buy a half a pound of a salted butter and just try working with it at home over the next, week to 10 days and see what you think. And I'd love to hear about it. I'd love some feedback on it, so let me know. Salted versus unsalted. I'm going to talk a few other butter items in some few other pods, so keep your eyes out for those. I'll be talking about clarifying butter and ghee. And then I'll be talking about why butter is ice cold in some recipes, room temperature in some recipes, and melted in others. So the butter discussion will continue. Q&A with Chef A, salted versus unsalted butter, Chef. I say salted. All right, guys, have a wonderful, delicious day, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.